PAS Summit 2016, and this is our virtual chapter code. You can use it to, for a registration of $100, $150 discount. And make sure you join PAS. This is a free membership, and if you join it before June 1st, you'll be eligible to vote for PAS elections. And be sure to join as many virtual chapters as you would like, and this is ours, Saturday Night SQL. And our next meeting is Adventures into Azure Databases for the first time by Miki, and she's a well-known speaker as well. If you would like to volunteer, please visit this site, volunteer.sqlpass.org, and stay involved. Now I'm gonna transfer the screen over to Jennifer. Give me a second.
There we go. With any luck, you guys can see my screen now.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Let's get something more definitive up here. Something like this. Hey, there we go. And let's minimize that. That didn't minimize it. It moved it. All right, close enough. Hi, everybody. This is Jen. We are doing Designing Stored Procedure Solutions. And may I congratulate all of you that showed up for taking time out on your Saturday nights. I have not been paying close attention to the Saturday Night VC, but this is actually pretty cool. Especially, I say this because we've got a Friday night webinar, and I'm always very impressed when people show up. All right, so first things first, let me tell you just a tiny bit about me. I am one of the two Midnight DBAs. You can see the Midnight DBA there on the left center. My husband Sean and I make training videos for SQL Server, PowerShell, pretty much just whatever catches our fancy, and put it up on midnightdba.com. We've been doing that for several years, and I did mention the web show already. We do Friday nights. We also run Midnight SQL Consulting, so we get to be the guys who swoop in, fix problems, and swoop back out again, and then answer lots of questions in email. And just recently, I should say, maybe a little over a year now, we've been running Minionware LLC. We have a software company. We're selling software. We're also giving away software. We've made free solutions for backup and index maintenance, so you can go to minionware.net and download those today. We don't ask for your emails or anything. I think you're going to be very, very impressed with our backup and our index maintenance. So, all right. Oh yeah, and I'm a Microsoft Certified Master, and for some reason I added a couch. Okay. So you will find that that Sean and I are tremendous fans of PowerPoint. So let's get started on this slide deck before we delve into code. All right, and that's the slide deck. If anyone wants that, I can totally put that deck up on the internet for you to download. But for now, I'm going to get out of here and get to the code. That's not code. This is code. I'm so now used to asking people in the back of the room if the font is big enough, that I'm finding a difficult time not asking you on your screens, is this big enough? But now we've got that out of the way. All right, so stored procedure solutions. What are we talking about today? This is not exactly an all about stored procedures class, although if you've never touched T-SQL, you'll pick up some. I really hope you've touched T-SQL before, ever. And if you're not all that familiar with stored procedures, you'll definitely pick something up. But if you are a regular coder and you are familiar with stored procedures, my goal here is basically to get you thinking about the processes and ideas around developing a solution. And the specific example I've taken is a stored procedure. So let's, first things first, I didn't run my setup, so let's do that. We're just going to create a new demo database. All right, so I like to teach with very specific solutions. I like to choose a real-world example and then code around that when doing something like this. Today what we're going to do is create something that will track database file sizes over time. You and I, we are creating our own little project within our organization because we've got some administrative stuff that we want to automate and take care of. There's more than one way to get this done, of course. Like absolutely anything from Microsoft, there's at least a half dozen different ways to go about it, and more than one of them may be right. It's like a recipe, you know. If we wanted to create some really, really good chocolate chip muffins, we could go out online and find a bunch of completely different recipes that all do very well and achieve our aim. We will also find a handful of recipes that are wrong, and bad. We'll get melted muffins or they use carob or something like that. So just like there are several ways to do something right, there are definitely ways to do things wrong. Let's bear that in mind as we go along. All right. So the first step when you encounter any new project really, really should be asking yourself a series of questions. And I've had people in class kind of complain and say, well, this is kind of a long list. Do we really have to ask ourselves these questions every time we start up a new solution? Well, yeah, I kind of think you should. But understand that if you're embarking on creating a small stored procedure for something, then go through these questions in your head, you know, just kind of a little mental checklist, tick, 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 and that it becomes second nature. But if you're starting off on a project that involves 5 different departments and 30 different people and is going to have, you know, multiple pieces and so, yeah, we're probably going to want a more formal process of writing these down and answering them and getting reviews and storing this somewhere. So first things first. Is this even possible? Well, sort of a proof of concept. In this case, where do we even get file size information? Lucky for us, well, lucky for us is nothing. I picked a very specific example, right? This is information that's very easy to get from SQL. It's in sys.master files. So we've got a list of all of our files. And if we scroll over a bit, right around, where did it go? There we go. We've got our size column. Excellent. So I really think that in every case you should start with that essential how-to, right? Where am I going to get this information? How easy is it to get it and so forth? But now we get to the rest of the questions. So first things first. Well, first things after our proof of concept. Do we have an existing solution out there? Now, I may have some kind of SQL administration piece in place. Maybe the last DBA put together a set of custom scripts that does some of what I want. Or we've purchased a vendor product that does some of what I want. So the answer might be, well, yeah, there is an existing solution. That doesn't necessarily mean you cancel your project, because how useful is that solution to you, right? Sometimes if it's very useful, then you'll go, oh, well, never mind then, I don't need to bother with this. But a lot of times you'll say, well, yeah, there's something in place, but it doesn't really get all the information I need, or it's not under my control, or it's not frequent enough, or it doesn't store the information, or it doesn't make it available to me. You know, there's all kinds of ways where an existing solution could still not meet your needs. It could still fail you. In our particular case, we don't have anything that's tracking file size information. So we're just going to go with a solid no and move on to the next question. Do we need this? This question's a little bit of a cheat because I dive into why do we need this? Do we need this? Yes. Why? Well, you know what? Just like a cooking show, I like to prepare everything beforehand and set it aside. So why do we need this? Well, I personally would like to know how much space the database files are taking up now and how fast they're growing, right? When people come and say, hey, you know, how big are the databases on Prod 1? I want an easy answer to that. I don't want to have to go and dig for it. Better yet, when they say, how much more disk are we going to need for Prod 1 next year, I would like to be able to take better than just a wild guess. You know, I would like to say, oh, well, it's been growing at this rate fairly consistently for the last 16 months. wow, really? You've been tracking that? Well, yeah, I've been tracking that. I'm a DBA. And then they get all impressed, and they're like, ooh. All right, so why do we need this? It's going to be used for capacity planning, among other things. What else? Well, let's see what else the system could be useful for. Tracking things over time, capacity planning, sure. I could also do spot checks with this. Okay, sure. That's something that could be, we're looking for ways to make our jobs easier. So having something to do a simple spot check, yes, absolutely, that could be good. Maybe looking at growth anomalies, right? Wow, we had this huge jump in size, not just a regular file growth. I wonder if we had a bulk load in January. I wonder if somebody messed with the growth rates, and I should check that out. So yeah, this could be useful for other things. This is a very valuable question whenever you're dealing, especially when you're dealing with administrative items, anything basically you're doing for yourself to make your job better, because that's when you start saving yourself time. That's when you start getting answers to questions that they haven't asked yet. But moving on. Who is going to use the solution that we're putting together? Well, me, for starters, in this particular case. Would anyone else find it useful? Yeah, I mean, the rest of my team would be interested. Maybe the SAN guys. It's possible some managers would be interested in that. This is kind of a tricky question. You wouldn't think so. But would anyone else find it useful? Later on, we'll get into questions of security and privacy. But for right now, there are certain things, and you may already be thinking in the direction of, oh, if my managers could be interested in it, then maybe I can send them regular reports on an automated basis. Yes, but let's be cautious about sending users information that's going to make our lives harder. For example, I don't tend to send deadlocking or even locking and blocking reports out, because that tends to make the uneducated panic. No. Blocking is largely a good thing. This is a healthy level of block. I don't want to have that conversation. But in this particular case, I don't see any major issues with sending out file size information to other teams. How often might this be used? Now, this question is going to affect both whether or not you pursue this project, right? If this is something, we've got this process I'm trying to automate that happens, I don't know, once every 18 months, maybe I should deprioritize this for a while because I've got more pressing things on my plate. But who knows? Maybe it's that onerous that it deserves some time. But also, how often might this be used in terms of, do I want to gather data on a monthly basis, weekly, daily? When I'm giving this session and Sean's in the room, we sort of have this little back and forth argument about, I'll say, oh, I would gather this information every week or every month, probably every week. And Sean would go, I would go hourly or daily, no more than that. And that's fine. It's going to depend. You can gather opinions if you want, or you can just sit down yourself and go, well, I think it should be this, and that's all there is to it. How often? So I'm going to say weekly, maybe daily. And ad hoc is needed, but this isn't something that's going to be running thousands of times a second, So it gives us, we have some leeway in terms of one of the major balances when you're creating something is balancing extreme speed, performance, over supportability, right? And also highly performant things can take some time to code. So in this particular case, we've got a little bit of wiggle room, I think. How big could this get? Now, this is a good question. Well, of course it's a good question. I put it in the presentation. But we always stumble across these things and, oh, this is my favorite. This is one of my favorite questions, because how big could this get doesn't tend to get answered, doesn't tend to get asked. How big could this project get in terms of scope? Right? Let's start there. In terms of scope, this could easily turn into another administrative function, another meta function for me, and another procedure, and another, and another. This could turn into a suite of tools, basically the in-database representation of that library of scripts that database administrators tend to keep, right? So this could become kind of a thing, right? And maybe we need to start thinking about that in terms of how all these things will tie together in the future. Scope also in terms of user base, right? So we've already asked the question, but it bears repeating. How many people could want their hands on this? Size and frequency, that tends to be like, how much data am I going to have to store? How much of it am I going to want to keep? We're definitely going to want a cleanup mechanism. Anytime, by the way, you're collecting information on an automated basis, you'd really better include a cleanup mechanism. Were we in the same room together, I would ask for a show of hands on how many people. I'm going to bring up my little chat here if I can. Oh, wait, no, it's right there. I forgot I've got this minimized. All right, no questions so far. But if we were in the room together, I would say, how many of you have walked into a shop and and gone, wow, gee, this table sure is big. I wonder what we're keeping that's 30 gigabytes, and it's 30 gigabytes of, I don't know, stored error files from jobs or just any kind of ridiculous thing like that. Please include a cleanup mechanism when you create your solutions. How many servers might I want to use this on? Interesting question. If I'm a DBA for a shop that's got 50 production servers, is it possible I might want to use this on more than one of them? And if so, what considerations might that bring in? Right? One of the ones that leaps immediately to mind is if I'm in a mixed shop. Let's say that the server that I'm focusing on right now is a 2012 or 2014 box, but I may want to expand this out and put this on 2008 or 2005 boxes even. Well, that means I've got to think about backward compatibility, right? Really valuable questions to ask yourself. How might this be used? Automated. Anything you can automate, automate it, please. That means we're going to want to set up an agent job. I think we talk about that a little bit later. We're going to want to set up alerts. Negative alerts, by the way. Don't send yourself positive alerts. This job completed. This job complete. It's just white noise. It just adds to the blizzard that is your inbox. Reports. You know what? I might get alerts when files grow beyond a certain size, but having reports available to my end users sounds like an absolutely fabulous way for me to answer way fewer emails. So the first couple of times that the boss or the SAN team says, hey, how much space are we taking up? And I say, here's this report. Here's a link to this report. And they'll eventually get the idea after the second or third time, or if they're particularly persistent, fifth or sixth or seventh. Pardon me. Are there any security concerns? Oh my, this is a wonderful question that needs asking more often. This particular case, I'm going to say no. Our database file sizes are not a matter of personally identifiable information. But be aware that when you're coding a solution, this is definitely something that should be on your initial list of questions. Where does the solution belong? All right. If you are a PowerShell guy, you tend to write everything in PowerShell. If you are a C# guy, you tend to write everything in C#, and so forth and so on. I really like T-SQL, and I'm a fan of PowerShell, so I tend to do things in T-SQL and PowerShell. It doesn't mean that's always the right tool for the job. On the other hand, your comfort level with a certain technology does enter into the answer to this question. If OLAP is the absolute best solution for what it is I'm doing, and I have absolutely no experience with OLAP, either I'm going to have to fudge something, or I'm going to have to get someone more qualified on this project. But generally speaking, especially like here where we're talking about a database administrative thing, we are tracking data about database files, and anytime we track something, we want to store that data in a table. We're DBAs. We have tables available to us. Don't put things in flat files. And it's going to happen repeatedly, so I'm going to use a job. In this case, this was a pretty easy answer. It stands to reason that we should put the data in the table and use a job that calls a stored procedure. All right, that is the end of our list of questions. We can all breathe a sigh of relief. We're going to make the quick case for stored procedures, and then we're going to start coding, right? because we like code. The case for stored procedures, it sounds obvious. It sounds like a no-brainer. Well, you know, it might sound like a no-brainer, but we may have some young'uns among us or folks that have never really seen the big deal of stored procedures. Why not just use ad hoc? Why not put the code in, just keep it in a file on your desktop? Why not any of a number of things? Well, let's talk about this for a minute. Stored procedures are great because they're procedural. I mean, you know, views absolutely have their place, but we want to do something and then potentially do something else and so forth. So that rules out views, that rules out functions because they can't do anything effective. They can only do some churning and then return a value. All right, so procedural, great, great. Stored procedures are stored. I love that. It's right in the name. It's in the database. It gets backed up when the database is backed up. Where the data goes, the stored procedure goes. That is a good thing. When my laptop fries, all of my scripts fry along with it, unless I've got something like OneDrive or Dropbox or whatever. And even those, by the way, are vulnerable to those attacks, ransomware attacks. That's what they're called. Ask us how we know. Stored procedures are contractual, which is super great because it's basically this cloud that says, you know, here are the set of inputs I will accept, and here is the output I will generate or the effect that I will have, you know, storing data in tables or what have you. And what happens in the middle is kind of magic. So if you need to make changes to how it operates, that's fine, as long as the contract remains the same. The same inputs are accepted, the same effects are expected. Then you can add logging, you can make the procedure more performant, you can do any of a number of things. Stored procedures are configurable. You can pass in parameters, you can pass in values to get different behavior. So we'll see later how we're just going to do like 1 or 2 databases instead of returning all. Now, instead, that means we can have one set of code instead of like generating several different cases or several different procedures. Stored procedures are maintainable. Since they're essentially stored and secured and backed up, that means that we're not going to have, oh, let's say 5 individual jobs with almost identical code in each and every one. Now that's a pain for a number of reasons, but the biggest one being if you have to make a change, you have to remember to go and change all 5 of those jobs and to change them in the same or very similar ways. Stored procedures are far more maintainable than duplicating your code out. They are secure. You can say very specifically who does and doesn't get to run it. You can grant permissions to run it, even for people who do not have permissions to the underlying table. Stored procedures are absolutely wonderful. This gets overlooked a lot. This is the last point we're going to make on this. Stored procedures have a tiny footprint. It's just a tiny network call as opposed to passing huge, long queries back and forth and passing the data itself back and forth. You can pass along the call. It does all the churning that it needs to. It returns the data that's been requested. All right, here we go. It's coding time. And it's where I am, it's almost 8:30, so I'm going to say this is the coding hour. All right, we have asked all the questions. We've made the case for stored procedures. Let's start with the very simplest case. This is important because if you're anything at all like me, you want to leap in and do everything at once, and you get bogged down in the muck of, oh, wait a minute, what about this case? Oh, hold on a second. If I do this, then I'm going to have to account for that. Oh, wait, but I haven't figured for the thing. It's really easy to get bogged down. So I literally make myself, I will write at the beginning of a solution that I'm going to create, what is the simplest case you can do? Well, in our case, the absolute simplest case is to get everything back from sys.master files, right? And we'll talk about why we're grabbing all of this data a little bit later. All right, so if the simplest case is getting everything back, well, then the continuation of that for our simplest case would be to store all of that in the table and have a stored procedure to get it and a job to run it. All right, so how am I going to make my table? I'm going to look at the existing table and grab all of the data types and the lengths. It's kind of wonderful when you're doing something like this and you've got a table on which to base your table. There's no guesswork involved. So I literally have just done a create table, and I'm putting everything in the audit schema. I like schemas. So I'm going to create DB file size, and I'm getting absolutely everything from sys.master files. There we go. So we have our new table. And by the way, yes, this script is up online, and it'll become more worth it later on. I'll show you where it is. We're going to skip pro tip for now because we're already a little bit short. Use semicolons. It's important. And now let's create our procedure to just pull all that data and stick it into that table. Okay, this is nice and simple. Let's go ahead and run this. All right, we have a table. We have a procedure. Let's run the procedure. Hey, the procedure ran. It selected data from sysmaster files into database file size. Oh, look at that. We've done a wonderful job, and we can pack up and go home, right? Well, no, but we've got a good start. We have, whoa, you go away. There we go. We have got an excellent simplest first case that works, and you know, just trust me that there's a SQL agent job out there that runs this on a regular basis. All right, now this particular pro tip, you can run store procedures without the exec or execute if you want to, but only if it's the first item in the batch. Just kind of a little side note. All right, so if we were in the same room together, I would say, this is wonderful and great, and we're all done. Does anyone see any issues at all with this solution? And I would get some puzzled looks, and I would get some hands waving around, and you would say, what would you say? Let's look ahead to see what you would say. Well, I'm going to say we're going to evaluate the table first. I know some of you are barking at the select star. We're going to get there. Don't worry about it. Let's look at that table first. For situations like this, where this is not going to run all that often, this is not running hundreds of times a minute or a second, where it's administrative in nature, I tend to err on the side of getting more data than I think I might need right now. So I'm actually going to keep most of the data in the table. I'm going to away very, very little, because at some point in the future, I may want to report on some of that. I may want to use some of that in ways that I have not thought of yet. So first things first, we're going to err on the side of keeping more than we think. But we're going to evaluate the table based on what we need. I've already explained that we're going to get more than we think we need. And on what I call most excellent practices. Why do I call them most excellent practices instead of just best practices? It's just kind of to call out that people think best practices are always best practice. You know, if it's a best practice, I'm going to do it that way all the time. Well, there are too many, it depends. There are too many exceptions. So we're going to say most excellent practices. These are probably good ideas most of the time. And the first probably good idea most of the time is to use third normal form. If you're not familiar with third normal form, there are wonderful Wikipedia entries on it. But more or less, it boils down to your table needs a primary key. One column contains one value. I don't want to see any of this name, and then that column contains first name, last name, middle name, Mr., and title and address. No, no, no. One column contains one value. One row represents one thing. In this case, one row is representing one database file at a point in time. And no duplicate data between rows. The classic case of this is an order table where the company's address is listed in every single order row. That doesn't belong there. It belongs in a separate table because it's just being repeated among the rows. My dog is trying to pay attention. Go dog. To paint a picture for you, she's a golden retriever and she smells awful. Consistency in data meetings. I have been in companies where they have very convoluted, okay, let's tell the truth. I've been in one company that's had this where the meaning of a row changed and the meaning of a column actually changed depending on what was in that column. And that's just wild. A thing should mean what it means, and that's all there is to it. Anything else is completely unsupportable. A solid naming scheme. Be consistent across your tables. Here we get to be consistent. We're just going to use the names in the underlying base table. This irritates the ever-loving crap out of Sean because he can't stand underscores in column names. But we could get into debates about that. At the end of the day, I'm happier if you're consistent. Unlike Microsoft itself, which can't decide in its own system tables between DB-ID, DB_ID, and database_ID. Makes me absolutely crazy. Solid naming scheme. Be consistent. Make sure that your names have meaning and that they're usable. I don't want to see any of this column name there. That's absolutely terrible. Don't do that. That looks like a swear. Data types. If there's a base table, match to your base table. If there's no base table for a particular column, just be consistent across. If I see phone number in one table, I want that to have the exact same data type and length in another table. Pay attention to your nullability, what's required and what's not. Pay attention to version compatibility. It's like we said before, if you're in a mixed shop, if there's any possibility that what you're writing is going to be on a box that's older, pay attention because some data types weren't introduced until later. Row number, which I use consistently, didn't come about until I think 2008. Somebody can correct me on that. It's starting to blur together now. Pay attention to your SQL versions. Measurement units. Let's go look at this right now. Let's drop our table first. We're going to recreate it. So I have added a primary key. I've added a surrogate key to be our primary key, and we'll have the discussion over surrogate and natural keys another day. But right now, this is what we've done. We've added database name. Before we didn't have database name. We just had the ID. I want to track database name and database ID. First off, because I'm being nice to myself. I want to look at my data and instantly see what database it is. I don't want to look at the number. I don't know what number that database is. And also because things can change. You can rename a database. You can drop and recreate a database with the same name and then it'll have a different database ID and so forth. We're keeping file ID. I remove file good. I don't care. I'm keeping the type description instead of type. It's just more user-friendly. I'm keeping data space ID. I don't actually, it refers to file group. I don't know if we care yet, but I'm going to err on the side of more data than I think I might need. Who knows? Maybe we'll want to do some reporting based on file group in the future. Name of the file, the physical name of the file, which includes location, the state description instead of state. Now, I had stopped myself at measurement units. If we were in the same room, I would ask you to raise your hand if you knew what size in this table is measured in. In sys.master files, size is the number of 8 kilobyte pages that the file contains. I have absolutely no idea how to do that math in my head. How many megabytes is 2034 8 kilobyte page? I have no idea. So I'm going to do that math for myself. I'm going to call it size MB. If I were of a different mind, I would go ahead and call out here size in 8 KB pages. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and keep the underlying table column name. But yeah, as much as possible, when you have a measurement, go ahead and mark it in your column name. Keeping the file growth information, whether it's percent growth and so forth, I can totally see doing an audit on that in the future. And the collection date. If we were in the same room, you would have gone, wait a minute. If we just keep adding data to this table, we have no idea when it was collected. Yes, please, please, please have a collection date in your table. Let's go ahead and create this. All right, now that we have our table taken care of, we need to look at our stored procedure. And we've got a couple of things, a couple of most excellent practices. Do not use select star in production. Don't do it. You need column lists. If your underlying table ever changes and you have a select star, then your system is going to break. Don't use select star in production. Always use a column list with insert statements as well, not just with select. All right, so let's change our procedure so that we are using an insert statement with a column list and we are selecting a column list. And we've also adjusted, of course, for the actual data that the table is going to accept. And we are going to use a batch date for our collection date. So every single file that we gather, we're going to gather all that information at once, and it'll all have the same date on it. So we'll be able to identify, okay, all this stuff was gathered on May 28th at 8:37 p.m. Let's go ahead and alter this. Oh yeah, and of course, since we added database name, I've added a join to sys.databases. All right, so let's run this and then select it back. Oh, that's nice. We've got the primary key identifier, database name, all this jazz. Over here, I've got size in megabytes. Ooh, that's quite nice. And then here's our collection date, all the same. Yay! This is lovely. This is not bad at all. If this had a cleanup mechanism, we really could let this roll as it is, and our job would be done. But we're going to do more. I'm wanting to make it better and bigger and all that sort of thing. So expand. Let's expand on this. We said before we might want to use this in an ad hoc capacity. Right now it's basically just automated. If I run this, it spits it out to the table, and then I've got that. Well, that's not really ad hoc. That's running it for the table. I said maybe we could do this for a single database. We haven't done cleanup yet, too. So let's do more. Let's attack that single storage procedure. That single. I beg your pardon. First thing that we're going to do is deal with the ad hoc use. But what this is about is the discussion of when does the stored procedure get too big? When should it be split into multiple stored procedures? We're not exactly running short on time, but I'll be brief just in case. The answer really is it depends. I tend to say that a stored procedure should do a thing, but your definition of a thing is going to vary based on a number of variables. If you're familiar with atom mechanics, SP who is active, it gathers information about currently running processes. But there are so many, that's what it does, that's the one thing that it does. But there are so many options within that as far as what to collect and how to collect it and whether to store it and so many different other things, whether to get deltas on values, that you could actually turn it into several different stored procedures. However, in Adam's case, it really does have one thing that it does. It gathers information about currently running processes with just a bunch of options. And furthermore, in his case, it's a download. He wants, I haven't talked to him about this specifically, but I imagine he wants people to be able to download one script that creates one object, and it's a nice interface. It's got that encapsulation that we talked about. So in this case, I'm going to say that the ad hoc is simply an option of our current stored procedure. I don't think it merits another stored procedure of its own. So let's add a parameter to deal with ad hoc use. I have added the log to table bit to our stored procedure, and notice that by default I am saying no, I don't want to log to table. This was pointed out to me by a programmer friend of mine who said that when you have the choice between a procedure having an effect on its world or not having an effect, like in this case, the ad hoc, we're not storing that data to a table, make the non-effective option the default. That way, if someone just runs it, that like on accident or without thinking, they're far less likely to affect anything really important. So let's look at this, and then we'll go back up and look at that pro tip. So log the table equals 0 just means we've got an if-then. If log the table equals 0, then just return the information, and otherwise get the information. I noticed, by the way, we switched, and I didn't mean to. Let's go ahead and fix this while we're here. We switched from grabbing the date beforehand to grabbing it right here in the middle. I don't like that. We need to be consistent. There we go, right here at the top. I'm going to use that. All right, we're being consistent. This from one version to the next, but still. All right, let's go ahead and alter this and run it. There we go. Notice, by the way, that's one of the pro tips. Document your stored procedures. It's one of the big advantages of stored procedures is that you can keep the documentation on the thing right there inside of it. So when you go to alter it, the documentation's right there and you can update it. All that you need. I like to keep not just a purpose, but also a list of parameters, example execution. If it's long enough, I'll actually keep a table of contents in terms of, you know, first it does this, then it does this, I'll go. Pardon me. But let's go ahead and run this. So we're going to run it with the default value, which means, oh, look at that. We now have the ability to run this ad hoc and just return it to ourselves. Or I can run with log the table equals 1, and it'll do that. Marvelous. Limit the input of your stored procedures. We could absolutely have said log to table char1 equals n. Okay, but that would allow people to input n or y, okay, or also t or f for true or false, or 1 or 0, or all kinds of crazy things. They might put a tilde in there just to make me mad. Similar and even worse is, let's say we do like a varchar 10. Well, what are the inputs? It's not obvious. Should it be no? Should it be false? Should it be, you know, negative sign? Who even knows? So as much as possible, limit your inputs where it's, especially where it's obvious to do so. In this case, it's a yes or no question. It's a bit, okay? If you can't limit it that strictly by type, then limit it by programming. Even here, where I've only allowed a 1 or a 0, you'll notice I've got if log to table equals 0, else if log to table equals 1. So if at some point in the future someone changes that to an int and then someone passes in a 3, it's just going to throw up its hands and do nothing, you know. So limit your inputs. All right, let's see what else. We wanted to, let's see, we already did our ad hoc, and now we want to say, well, maybe I just want to run this for a single database. Okay, I could absolutely add a parameter that's just at DB name, right? And that way I could do a fairly traditional thing of if it's null, so here we go. If it's null, then return everything, otherwise return whatever that single database is, right? I'm making this for me, and I want to be as nice to me as I possibly can. So what I'm going to do is add a database filter. And let me show you how this works. We've already got our log that's already in there. And down here, we do where d.name like database filter. And since our database filter by default is a wildcard, see there? When we get down here, we say d.name like database filter, it's going to return everything by default. I like this. This is fairly clever. Let me alter this and run it a few different ways. So I'm getting funky lag on my computer. So this might, there we go. All right. So, and I've updated the example execution. So by default, we're going to get everything, and it's going to be ad hoc. Cool. All right. Now let's say I want just the databases that start with the word minion. See, now I've got a much more flexible stored procedure. I didn't have to do this. I didn't have to make it more usable in this way. But, you know, I'm the one that's going to be using this primarily. I want to be nice to myself. I want to be able to get just the one. I can get minion by removing the wildcard. I want to be able to use wildcards if I want. This is absolutely brilliant. So, yeah, when you see the opportunity to be really nice to yourself, please do so. All right, what do we get next? Oh, yeah, I said at the beginning that there's more than one way to attack this problem. And what we've got is absolutely a fine solution. We could let this go, again, once we've dealt with cleanup, which we'll do in a minute, and go on about our lives. But let's explore another option, because we've got all of SQL Server laid out before us. Let's see what else we can do. Table valued parameters are another one of our options here. I was using filters before. Now let's see about adding in. We could, of course, read in the list of comma delimited values, but let's look at table valued parameters. So to use a table valued parameter, we actually have to create a new type, a table type. So let's do this, and then we'll create a different procedure just for example. And our database filter is going to be of that new type, that DB list type. By the way, when you use table valued parameters, it has to be marked read only. So then down in here, we'll inner join to that parameter on the database name. And that's really the only difference. Now, I'll show you why I don't like this for this particular case is because it's fussier to run. In order to run it, I have to create that variable, I have to populate it, and then I have to run it. And I also haven't done anything in there to deal with the idea of just a default run. You know, I can't just do, that's not going to return anything to me, and I don't like that. Now, I could deal with that programmatically. I could say, okay, if there are no rows in database filter, then, and so forth. But just me personally, having to deal with that, in this case, it's not necessary and it's fiddly. In other cases, a table valued parameter may absolutely make sense, and that's why we explore these different ideas. All right. We're finally down to adding cleanup, and by the way, we are back to just using our database filter from here. So cleanup, you could absolutely say, oh, you know what, I'm going to keep disk information for, I don't know, 2 years. Well, we'll keep, sorry, not disk, but database file information for 2 years. But again, let's be nice to ourselves. Let's add a parameter and say, okay, fine, the default is 2 years, but when I run this, obviously I can change things. Make sure there aren't any comments or questions. Isn't it a good practice to name your columns for inserts? Name your columns for inserts. Oh, that must be from a little ways back.
Yes.
I think what you're asking there is, here, let me jump back up. We'll come back down. We're on line 686, give or take. Let me jump back to where we first did that insert with the list name. So here's our insert into DB file size and so forth. I think what you're asking is about doing this. Select d.name as DB name. Yeah, this can cut down on confusion. I mean, it's kind of nice. I don't know if SSMS does this by default or if this is SQL prompt doing it for me. But when I click on a column in my list, it highlights it in the select in the insert list above. So sure, absolutely, you can do that if you like. And if I've misunderstood the question, I apologize, and then rephrase it for me. All right, we'll get back down to where we were. I said we were at 6. There we go. We're adding cleanup. That's right. So there's our retention days, and all of this is going to be the same as it was before we started mucking around with table variables. See, there we go. There's our where d.name like database filter, and there's our if log to table. But down here afterward, we've got a delete from where collection date is less than retention days ago, that many days ago. All right, let's go ahead and do this. All right, and let's do our example execution with retention days. We'll be specific. We'll say equals 365. And that way, at the end of it, it'll try and delete anything that's older than 365 days. Well, clearly we're not going to have any of that today because we've only been doing this for a couple of minutes now. This brings up, yet again though, and I'm going to encourage you as you're developing your solutions to ask questions about the things that you do by default. What I have done by default here is just stick my cleanup mechanism right here inside the stored procedure. But we've already talked about the idea that this could become part of a larger suite of procedures, all of them helping me manage the enterprise. Well, if that's the case, would it be worthwhile to centralize that cleanup, to say, well, I'm going to be collecting, I don't know, maybe a dozen different pieces of data, and that just at the outset, maybe this shouldn't go inside the stored procedure. Maybe this should be its own procedure, and it'll handle all of the collections? So I will leave you to ponder that. I'm going to roll through. We might come back to this. This is just that basic idea. I tend to get muddled up in figuring out things like this. And so there's a section in here for breaking down that process. But we may skip over it today. I do want to see if there are any other questions. So definitely enter those into the chat room if they come up. But let's see what else have we got. Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you, past me, for putting in these notes. So we've gone through all of this stuff. The questions, the proof of concepts, the initial case, evaluating, expanding, being nice to ourselves, exploring other things, and we haven't even touched performance. I did say early on that we've got some wiggle room here. I don't think you can ever afford to completely ignore performance. Don't go running around dropping cursors and everything that you do and saying, well, Jen said it was okay because it's just an admin thing. No, hold tight. I said that you've got some wiggle room. So now that we're at the point where we've got something fairly functional, and to be honest with you, I keep performance in the back of my head at the very least while I'm doing all this. We can't go over all the performance stuff today. It's an absolutely gigantic topic. There are sessions and pre-cons and week-long classes and books. There's too much to cover, but we'll at least dance along a few bullet list items, right? Everything we've already said so far. Third normal form for tables, consistency among your domains, and by that I mean, you know, like the phone number thing, right? It's got to be phone number, nvarchar, what have you, 30 or whatever the standard is. And it's going to be the same everywhere. Things like that. The inconsistencies between data types can cause extra, oh, hang on, the words are escaping me, conversions, implicit conversions, and that's one extra hit. So follow your most excellent practices is a great place to start for performance. I've got avoid cursors on here. I'm going to leave it there. I've got people that are like, well, no, because cursors are totally useful. Well, yeah, cursors are useful. I use them myself. I wrote one today, as a matter of fact. But when I say avoid cursors, I am speaking mostly to the people who use cursors in place of row set functions, which happens so much that this is the second bullet point on my list. If you have create a cursor and for each cursor update the third column, then you are not using cursors right. Avoid query hints. I've been barked at for this one too, but again, I'm going to stick with it. By and large, some very large percentage of the time, you don't need to tell the optimizer its job. It is occasionally necessary to say, no, you need to use this kind of a join. No, you need to do a scan instead of a seek or what have you. But generally speaking, if the optimizer has updated stats, it's going to do more or less fine on its own. Test your code with realistic data. What do I mean by realistic data? I mean, if at all possible, load a few 100,000 rows into your system and then run your reports, and then run your selects, and then run your everything, because that's how it's eventually going to be. You're going to have hundreds of thousands, you're going to have millions, you're going to have a lot. So, you know, data generators really aren't that, I don't think are that expensive. If you can't spring for one, then, I don't know, do your best. Steal some gibberish codes, some gibberish data from elsewhere. Examine your query plans when you do this. If you have not begun learning about performance, or if you've never looked at an execution plan before, I highly recommend Grant Fritchie's books on execution plans. Absolutely excellent place to start. It'll tell you, I mean, it'll automatically tell you, here, let's do this. Here, now you will have seen an execution plan. But up here, if I were missing an obvious index, the engine is nice enough to tell me there's a missing index, and it would prove your thing, but that's worth looking at, absolutely. So look at your execution plans. Index appropriately. We are DBAs, and when we code for ourselves, I tend to find that people kind of forget the indexing. If it's a part of a project, if there are other people involved, oh yeah, we're totally, oh God, look at the stupid indexing these people. No. But yeah, when we write our own functions, when we write our own stuff, it kind of goes by the wayside. So definitely look into your indexing. Parameter sniffing is a whole topic unto itself, but I'm at least putting it on here so that when someone says, wow, this procedure's been running fine forever, but it just suddenly started performing poorly for an hour and then it worked fine again, you can go and Google parameter sniffing. And there's a discussion to be had on breaking rules, but I'm going to pause and see chat, see if there's performance book recommendation. Yes, start with Grant Frecci's books on execution plans here, as long as we're here. No, not you. Let's see, Amazon, Grant. I wish I could see what I was typing. Yes, Grant Fitchy, that's going to be fine. SQL Server execution plans. There you go. That's a great one to start with. Others off the top of my head, I'll have to think about it. Maybe I'll put something up on the site, or you can ping me later. Looking up. Do you use output parameters in your stored procedures, and where are they useful? That is a great question, Alex. I don't know that I've ever gotten that, or not in years. I don't, actually. I don't tend to use output parameters hardly ever. I'm sure they're useful, but at the moment I can't think where. I suppose if you want to get a little signal of information back more than this ran successfully, sure. I don't see anything wrong with that. Basically, if you see a case for an output parameter, go for it and write me, because that sounds awesome. But no, I don't think I've ever actually, in my entire career, used one where it wasn't ordered onto me. Hang on, Sean looks like he wants to say something. Yeah. Yeah, to summarize, anything you get back from an output parameter, you could more easily get back from a select statement, that kind of thing. So yeah. Let's see if I've missed anything else. Small network calls as compared with what objects? Small network calls meaning that if you are storing your code in the application, if you're storing your T-SQL in the application layer, then the application has to send the entire query across the network to the database, get all that data back, do whatever it needs to with it, send across another query, and so forth and so on, as opposed to a stored procedure call, which is, what have we been looking at here? Maybe a few dozen characters maximum. I've seen queries that go on for pages. Not kidding. And if you start talking to me about ORMs, I'm going to get stompy. The best use, in my opinion, for ORMs is to point them at stored procedures, because I've seen some really amazing stuff come out of that as well.
So, Jen,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Not at all.
That was my question, because I saw you said using stored procedures has small network calls. I was wondering, were you comparing to, say, like a views or something as a...
Well, yeah, any place where you have, again, the easiest way to look at this is if you've got an application that's talking to a database, right? Mm-hmm. And programmers tend to want the code, the actual queries and updates and insert statements inside the application. Lord only knows why. I really don't know why they would want that responsibility. And not only does that leave us wide open to duplicated code throughout the application, and leaving T-SQL in the hands of developers, which don't like. But yeah, if you're querying from a view, you still have the whole select statement, the select from the view itself, if you're joining it to anything else, the where clause, as opposed to exec DDO.getInfo. Maybe a parameter or two. And most of the time, it's not a simple select from a view. It's an entire process of several queries that has been stuffed into the application side all of that should be pulled out, along with all the business logic and the error handling and everything else, into a stored procedure on the database side. So, question: I thought if you only need to return a few data points instead of a set, it is better to use a parameter for performance and resource consideration. Hang on, let me think about this. If you only need to return a few data points instead of a data set, it's better to use a parameter for performance and resource. I'm sorry, Peter, I don't necessarily understand the question. Please try again.
Peter, you are unmuted. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, Jen, what I believe to be data set return, the select statement as data set return is more expensive than passing a few parameters. So if you only need to pass back a few data points instead of data set, the output parameter might be overperforming than a select statement.
Basically, you're asking if I only have to return one row back, yes, then I shouldn't necessarily have an entire stored procedure for that?
I won't use select statement as data set to return to the application rather than to use output parameters to pass the data back to the application.
Oh, I see. This is as opposed to using output parameters. I don't know that there's any kind of performance gain at all. I really don't. And if it is, I'd be very surprised if it weren't negligible. But no, I don't know. If you have a preference for output parameters, I don't have any real objection to them. The only real objection I have is coding them. I don't like coding them. I don't like using them personally. But that's me.
We did some performance evaluation. The output parameter outperforming the select statement as data set.
Yeah, Sean's saying that there can be a tiny advantage to output parameters from the front end, but it's absolutely minuscule. But again, I don't really have any objection. If it fits your solution, then go for it.
Also, because I'm in both application and the database side, for application to retrieve a data set that need more resource to be allocated than to access the parameters.
I'm sorry, you've now broken up quite badly.
Okay, let me try again. Maybe because I'm also not only in the database side, I'm also in the application side. So from the application side, let's say...
I'm really sorry, Peter. I think you should go ahead and type your question. It's breaking up bad.
Oh, I guess he was saying he's on both sides of the spectrum.
Sadly enough, I can't understand. My apologies. Sarah, I don't know if you're getting him, but I'm simply not.
He's saying he's on both sides of the spectrum. So he's talking about the question. I think the first person said. I'm trying to go back, see what he said. The output parameter.
Are you hearing me, Sarah?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay.
I think I can hear you, but I'm just not getting the entire question. So, if you like, for the sake of the recording, I can take this offline with Peter, or we can continue. It's completely up to you. Okay, here we go. Question for C# code to retrieve one row of data set. The cost of that is larger than me to pick the data in the parameter. Yeah, that's what Sean was saying, was that basically on the front end there can be a small performance gain but that it's fairly minuscule. So I'd have to look up and see the head-to-head, the research that's actually been done on this, and see if it's big enough to warrant consideration, like maybe in cases where it is, what you're running is running 100 times a minute or what have you. So something like that. Here, we've got the wiggle room not to care.
Okay, understood.
But good question, thank you. Sorry for all the back and forth.
It's okay. Sarah, you can mute me.
Do you have more
right.
questions? I don't see any more questions at this point.
That's fine, and we kind of blazed through this today, and I'm fine with that. If you would like the download of this code to play with yourself, and it's all very self-contained, you can go to my website, midnightdba.com/gen. You do need the www. Unfortunately, we're fighting with our host about null headers. Let's see. I believe under sessions and publications, you'll find the stored procedures solutions, and that should have the downloads. There we go. Designing stored procedures, and there's the demo code. So there you go.
Okay, cool.
And any questions, you can totally find me. I've got email, obviously, and I'm on Twitter. And you can probably contact, God, I hope you can contact me through my website. Somewhere in here, there's a way to contact me, I'm sure.
Okay, so Jen, do you mind if I also post your code on our chapter website?
Oh, no, that's perfectly fine.
Okay. Okay. If you could email me, that would be great. I can post the information, and as long as your website information on our website, so that people can easily find them.
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for this great presentation, and I really appreciate you taking the time on the holiday long weekend to present for our chapter.